All right, my babies. Video number 2. Script is, if you're being smart about something, what are the chances that it is stupid? Remember, all these notes are for myself. We have an expression in Arabic. سارد على حالي. And it's fascinating. The way I'm looking at it is that you, حالي in Arabic means my state, right? It doesn't mean myself. And it's interesting because it's kind of one of those, like I'm reflecting, so I'm thinking of my state. But the state is the symptom of whatever your action is or whatever like the end result is the environment, which is the state. That's basically like the thing that I'm talking about. And so a big part of my language was very much kind of like symptomatic. The end result. What are you doing, Tariq? Well, I'm thinking of my state. And you'd say that with a whole not thinking. I don't think Sarid doesn't mean thinking. Giving attention to. Sarid means giving attention to. Sarid is what happens when you smoke weed, right? It's not that I'm high or smoking weed or anything. But the idea is like when you smoke weed, you kind of you have only one thing in mind and you kind of like flow with it, right? But when you say that you're kind of like flowing with your state, you're kind of representing yourself as a bitch of your environment, right? Because if look at a fucking plastic bag, if a wind happens, it kind of flows with it. And it's not the best of design, and it's not the best of kind of like, because it keeps flowing on the ground. It's not like it floats and it flies, right? It flows on the ground, so it keeps getting scratched and eventually kind of like tears apart. And the idea is behind that is basically like, I was being smart about how I am spending my attention. But nowadays, I don't say on my state. I'm not spending my attention on my state. I say I'm spending my attention on myself. Why? Because however I am is expressed through the self, myself, how I interact with the world. And the self for me is the engine of expression because it expresses the physical, it expresses the mental, it expresses the emotional, right? It expresses the spiritual. It's that kind of thing where I could go through in any direction. If I'm thinking and I want to move my hands, then that kind of like goes through how I move, my sense of style. Where does my sense of style live? And kind of like it exists through that dynamic parts, like that space where the emotion goes through my mind, where basically the emotion is expressed through the body, whether I'm like being anxious or excited, or whether the mind kind of like develops something, right? There's that kind of like core around your heart, maybe around your energy, your stomach, something that translates who you are into this world, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of that kind of like it allows this world to see, to observe who you are. And for me, that is what the self is. And so anytime I'm being, like, back to this, if you're being smart about something, what are the chances that it is stupid? Yeah, the minute your opinion becomes a judgment, that's basically where you start feeling conceited. Conceited? No, to concede is to basically like, accept defeat. Conceited. You approach it with arrogance. And it's kind of like the thing, right? Like, I've been saying this for so long, and it's sounding very smart. And for everyone I see it, everyone goes like, oh, Tariq, you never change. And I kind of go like, yeah, that's me. And then one day I kind of like realized, like, I'm spending all my attention at the end result of my process, whether it's my emotional process, my thinking process, my physical process, or my spiritual process. And I'm using these four specifically because I've thought about them before. I feel intuition is in between, and the actual, like the drive is the intention / will, right? It's like we are that combination. Our ego is that kind of like cubish thing. I'm sorry, man, I'm using very much like, whatever. Anyways, a lot is happening right now. But anytime you're being smart about something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an intelligent thing that you're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean you are actually being intelligent, or you are, you are smart on its own self. The word smart kind of means you one-upped it, right? Because intelligence and being smart are two different things. Smart meaning. Why wouldn't we look at the actual meaning of being smart? Having or showing intelligence, right? So being intelligent, being smart is having or showing intelligence. And it's funny because like here, if you're being smart, right? That's what I'm writing about. If you're being smart about something, doesn't mean you are. It doesn't necessarily mean you are. But it kind of gives you the same confidence. So saying something with full confidence makes you sound smart. Doesn't really mean you are. It's a social thing. It's a way people kind of like interact. A whole lot of the work, man, that comes with a whole lot of the work that kind of comes with your presence, I feel are kind of like patterns that have developed over time. And if we're looking at, because we look at an environment, and then we see the environment, and we go like, what created the environment? It's the patterns that kind of like, put everything in place or keep everything in place. And then if you take a step back and you go like, all right, how did the patterns come to be? Well, the patterns kind of like represent a certain system, right? And then when you look at the system, you kind of like start realizing there are certain kind of like bits and pieces and parts that connect with each other a certain way that make a system. And you see what we're doing. We're kind of like going from the surface, which is the environment, all the way down. And then when you look at that system and you see the bits and parts of it, you kind of like realize that each part has a certain correlation because they're built with the same material, right? Like the car is built through using steel and other material, but so is an engine, and so are the tires. But the materials kind of like shift and the design is different. So ultimately, you are at the core of that design. You are at the core. Yourself is basically the core of that kind of like energy that directs, adjusts, and kind of like flows. And again, if you're being smart, which means you kind of like, we're talking about the internal structure that expresses, that builds, that contributes, whether it's verbally, like here I'm saying you're being smart, but like as well if you're kind of like, well, we tend to express mainly through, well, being smart could be expressed in multiple ways. So let's stick to this instead of like diving horizontally into the different pieces. Ultimately, the day you realize yourself, noticing the results or approving of the results, which is basically you're being smart, right? So the result is you kind of like being smart. The day that kicks in, the one thing that happens, and that happens kind of like brilliantly, is that you lose your dynamic approach, which allowed you to kind of like to evolve, which allowed for the process to kind of like bring about the feeling of smart, because you weren't feeling smart before, now you are. So something kind of like made you feel smart. And ultimately, the minute you feel smart is the day you started doing something wrong, because ultimately you're going to feel smart now, but in a couple of weeks, you're going to remember this feeling. It's no longer going to feel that way. It's just going to be a memory. So the chances that it's stupid increase day after day from the moment of its conception. And I feel that's something very heavy that we have to kind of like consider, because like, every single time something kind of like clicks, that was its moment done. Beyond that, something else has to click, or else we're just returning to that moment instead of kind of like utilizing it in order for this moment to expand differently. I feel like I switched throughout the video, but hey, it turned out to be a cute one. I love you guys. Peace out.